Okay. So my name is Andy Boynton, and I'm the Dean of the Carroll School. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us at the 16th Annual Finance Conference. This is really, to my mind, a celebration of the entire Carroll School's faculty and staff, which really is an extraordinarily talented team of people. And in our business, and in this business, university, in my mind, it is a talent game. And at the heart of it, it comes down to faculty. And we have great faculty in the Carroll School. This is the finance conference, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the finance faculty that we have. We're hiring now faculty that 10 years ago would never have interviewed in the Carroll School at BC. These are literally amongst the world's strongest, most accomplished faculty in terms of research and teaching. And it's just a great group of finance professors. I hope you have a chance to meet them today. In a minute, I'll ask them to stand up. And just to tell you how extraordinary they are, and I'm not going to spend much time up here, but it's worth pausing and recognizing this group of people before our terrific speakers and our lineup. Is this finance department. They have a ranking called the Shanghai Research Ranking, which is really the only ranking of finance departments around the world that focuses on the research quality, the productivity of a finance department, purely. Not a lot of opinions and this and that. It's what do they do and they accomplish. Our finance department is ranked 7th in the world in finance departments. Now, business schools are a big business, and finance is the big business in most business schools. So when you look at the list, it's, I don't know, Ronnie Sotka, my friends, I'll introduce Ronnie in a minute, but it's, Wharton, it's Chicago, it's Stanford, it's Harvard, it's MIT, it's that, and then Boston College, right? We're right there. And those are the schools that we compete against in terms of attracting faculty, and that's what this finance department has accomplished. They also are terrific teachers. And I think we can look at that, witness that, because if you look at the marketplace for talent at BC, the students know where the great teachers are and where the great jobs are. And presently, finance, for the first time ever at Boston College, is the largest single major. We call it a concentration. There's 1,300 majors in finance or concentrators in finance in the undergraduate population. Out of about 2,400 Carroll School students, over half our students are majoring in finance. Now, many of you hire those students, that helps, but they also are attracted to this terrific group of faculty. And in addition to the majors in the Carroll School, finance is now the largest single minor on campus, with 600 minors from the Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences in finance. And they're there because, I think, of the faculty and the talent in the room. And I'd like to credit all of this group and have all the finance faculty in the room stand up, and let's give them a big round of applause. They're here, there, the back. I mean, it's a great group. And in particular, I was just talking to my friend Mark Seidner, who I'll introduce in a minute. He's a trustee and has played a very important role in the Carroll School recently and the university. But Mark was just saying to me, you got to keep pushing. You got to keep pushing. You got to keep getting better. And that's kind of my attitude for people who know me. I'm not one to stand around. I didn't come back here to kind of be a dean and just be comfortable. I'm alum of BC. I graduated in 1978. I lived in Switzerland. My wife and I were going to stay there forever. Here we are, and I run as hard as I can. But Mark was saying you got to keep pushing. And there's one person who pushes harder than I do and runs faster than I do and has in his heart, he's not a BC alum, but in his heart is really imbued the motto of BC, ever to excel, which means every day we got to get better. And that person is Ronnie Sotka. Ronnie is the chairperson of the finance department, the senior associate dean for faculty in the Carroll School. And Ronnie every day is on me saying, okay, what do we do? How do we hire more talent? How do we get a better curriculum? How do we attract better students? And so Ronnie is a really key leader in the Carroll School and at Boston College. Ronnie, would you stand up? He's amazing. This guy, he really is. Thank you. You know, Ronnie and I'll be sitting there and like we want to get things done, and he'll say, you know, if we're not going to try to be great, why bother? And that's kind of my view. And we're great, but we're going to try to get greater. So to credit to the entire faculty of the Carroll School, the staff, and today we're particularly honoring this group of talented finance professors. But a lot of the success is that we have the talent, we have the drive, but also I want to thank many of you who have been very generous as alum and friends of BC, as parents, with your philanthropy and providing us the resources, the financial resources to do this. We have great visions, we have great aspirations, but without the capital that we can put to work, it's not going to happen. So we really thank you for all your support, financially, hiring our students, helping organize this conference and the like, but it's key to our success. Boston College is fairly well financed, but they don't provide the real resources we need to drive this forward every day in the Carroll School. And that comes from philanthropy and all of you. Speaking of philanthropy, last week we hired a new faculty member in the Carroll School. And many of you may have heard that last week, or 2 weeks ago now, we announced the hiring of Paul Romer, 2018 Nobel laureate in economics. Paul will be joining the finance department this fall. And it's BC's first Nobel laureate. He's going to be teaching undergraduates. He's going to start a center related to ideas, which is the heart of his research that won him a Nobel Prize, and economic success. And he's going to be joining this group of faculty. He can't wait. We can't wait for Paul to arrive. But we're really thrilled that Paul Romer is going to be on the faculty at Boston College. And one of the reasons Paul's joining us is he's going to be an inaugural university professorship. There's chair professorships, and then there's university professorships. And university professorships are at the peak of their kind of prestige in our world. And BC had its first endowed university professorship, and the holder of that will be Paul Romer. But I'd like to thank Mark Seidner. Where's Mark? Because this professorship over there, the professorship will be the Seidner University Professorship held by Paul Romer. Mark is a trustee. Yes, big round of applause. And Mark's generosity provided this foundational gift that helped attract Romer to Boston College. Mark's a trustee. He's a 1988 graduate of Boston College. His daughter is a junior, finishing up her exams right now at BC. And we got to know Mark, I don't know how many years ago, Mark, but you helped with the finance conference. And we were on the phone doing our Zoom calls with Dan Holland and stuff. And I honestly had no idea at the time you'd be, we'd be talking about this university professorship. And when you heard Romer speak last year, you came up to me and said, get him, whatever it takes, get him. And thank you for making it possible. Now I got to look at my notes and get for a minute oriented. So you're here today. We thank you for that. And this is really the one big tent event the Carroll School does. Some of our centers do big tent events, but this is really the one big event the Carroll School does together. And we've designed it in a way where it's not just about finance for those that haven't attended, but we have Malcolm Gladwell today. We're going to talk about energy today. We're going to talk about global political situation. We have a great lineup of really accomplished speakers today. And in the spirit of Boston College and what we're trying to do here is, I believe, a love of learning for life. And many of you are here, I hope, sure, to celebrate, to be together, to get to see your friends again, but also to learn a lot today. And we're going to all learn a lot today. That's really the heart of what this conference is designed to do, is bring in speakers where we can all learn a lot. Thank you for joining us. And a very special thanks, again, to Mark, who was a co-chair for the finance conference, To John Reuter, Professor Jonathan Reuter. John, where are you? Would you stand up? Because he's a co-chair for the conference and has been. John, thank you. And a special thank you to my friend and alum, Dan Holland, who also is a co-chair. Dan, where are you? There you go, Dan. I'm going to introduce Dan. Dan's going to serve as the Master of Ceremonies for the morning event. And today, Dan is the Chief Operating Officer at Shield Capital, a venture capital firm focused in kind of advanced technologies, frontier technologies in the areas of cybersecurity, space, autonomy, and artificial intelligence. Prior to joining Shield, Dan spent 35 years at Goldman Sachs. Holland began his career in the fixed income division of Goldman Sachs and was a managing director in 1999 and served in the private wealth management business in New England. He's also served in the Navy. He's in the Navy Reserves. He's a vice chairman of the Naval War College Foundation. Dan's involved with lots of things. I kind of kid him. He retired from Goldman Sachs, and you just love to work. You're more busy now than you worked running private wealth management in New England for Goldman. I don't quite understand that, but whatever. He's just super energy, super engaged person. A friend of mine, he's an okay striped bass fisherman, but otherwise he does everything else really well. He also I should have said, he's a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from BC. I think you graduated 1 year after me. And so I've been 1979. He also has an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. So thank you for listening to me, for meeting my colleagues and giving them big rounds of applause. Let's give Dan a big round of applause as I introduce him as the MC.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for that kind introduction. Welcome to all of you. I just want to say for a minute, none of this happens, all those great things that Andy just talked about, none of those happen without Andy Boynton. He has been the leader. He has been driving this change. He has done tremendous things for this school, for this university, and I'm really grateful to call him my friend. So thank you, Andy. As Andy said, this conference has really been about convening great thinkers, great speakers, and providing learning to all of us. And today is no exception. This morning, our speaker is Malcolm Gladwell, who probably needs no introduction, but at his essence, he's one of the greatest storytellers of our time. And he gets his inspirations from a lot of different sources. We talked about that a little bit at breakfast. And he manifests that in a lot of different ways. And I'll just recap a few of them. He's written phenomenally successful bestsellers that have changed the way we think about the world. His newest book is called The Bomber Mafia: A Dream, a Temptation, and the Longest Night of the Second World War. It was inspired by a 4-part series about General Curtis LeMay on his podcast, Revisionist History. His first book, The Tipping Point, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 400 plus weeks. That's almost 8 years on the bestsellers list. Think how hard it is to write, a bestseller, but then to keep it on the bestsellers list for over 8 years. His other books, also New York Times bestsellers, are Blink, Outliers, and David and Goliath. He's the host of the podcast titled Revisionist History, now in its 8th season. In the weekly podcast, he re-examines an overlooked or misunderstood aspect of past events. He's a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. He's been named one of the 100 most influential people by Time magazine and one of foreign policy's top global thinkers. We are very proud and excited to have him with us today. He's going to speak for about 45 minutes. We're going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, so think about your questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan and Andy. Very warm for that warm introduction. Thank you for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure. This is my first time ever speaking at a Jesuit school, which is a big deal because I don't know if you know that on my podcast a couple seasons ago, I did several episodes about how to think like a Jesuit. And in the course of doing that, I interviewed Boston College's own Father Jim Keenan. When I was doing all these interviews with Jesuits, at one point I asked if I do this podcast series, can I be an honorary Jesuit? And they were like, apparently the bar is really high. Even the bar is high to be a Jesuit, it's even high for being an honorary Jesuit. So what I was wondering whether showing up at 6:30 this morning for the breakfast and then coming to speak to all of you, does that count in my favor? Do I still have a shot at being an honorary Jesuit? By the way, I was so serious about it, I went to see Father Keenan in Rome. That's how much effort I put into trying to get that exalted status. The other guy I interviewed for that was Father James Martin, who also went to Boston College. It was, it's like I was campaigning for this invitation. But when I was rooting around on the Boston College website, and I realized that Matt Ryan went to Boston College, which I had forgotten, which is crazy because what are the odds that someone whose name is Matthew Thomas Ryan didn't play football at Boston College? Anyway, I'm very, very thrilled to be here. I was told I could talk about whatever I wanted, which is a really, really dangerous thing. It's like going to your teenage son on a Friday night and saying, here's $1,000. Go and have fun. You want to do that. It's not a good idea. Anyway, but I am going to behave. And I told the good folks here at the Carroll School that I wanted to talk about meritocracies. And I think that's a subject on which we all sort of superficially agree that we want to live in a world that's a meritocracy. We want to attend institutions that are meritocratic. We want to participate in a society that's meritocratic. We like the idea that people are rewarded for their talent and their effort, right? And we think that is the surest path to create a sense of belonging and trust and belief in a system. So given that, my question is, are we good at building meritocracies? Are the meritocracies that we build actually meritocratic, right? So what I thought I'd do this morning is kind of take a hard look at whether the meritocracies that we build for ourselves are actually any good at that. In the course of doing this, I don't have the time to do a kind of complete analysis of this, so I'm going to pick a couple of areas and just examine them in detail and go down some pretty nerdy rabbit holes. I'm even going to use PowerPoint, which is, I almost never use PowerPoint, but I figured so many of you are here either from the world of business or going into the world of business, and I think you might be disappointed if there was a presentation without PowerPoint. So as a further effort to ingratiate myself with you and increase my odds of being named an honorary Jesuit, I'm going to do a lot of PowerPoint. So I'm going to put forward this morning 3 propositions about meritocracies. And I'm going to warn you there's going to be a lot of discussion of hockey, which I realize is a sore topic in Boston at this moment, given the untimely demise of your Bruins. But I'm a Canadian, and that gives me the right to talk about hockey as much as I want. And if you don't like hockey, I'm very sorry. No, I'm going to try and make it relevant for you. So, 3 propositions about meritocracies. Proposition number 1. Most things that call themselves meritocracies are not, in fact, meritocratic. And so let me illustrate this with a story that I told back in my book, Outliers. It's a story about a guy named Roger Barnsley. and his wife Paula. And Barnsley is a psychologist in Canada. At the time, he was living in Alberta. And he went to a hockey game with his wife and his 2 kids, and it was the Lethbridge Broncos, which is major junior A hockey in Canada, which is 1 rung below the NHL. It's serious, highly competitive hockey. And his wife has the program for the game, and she's looking at it, right? And she turns to Roger and she says, "What's going on with the players?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" And she points to the roster of the players because she sees a pattern. And this pattern, it turns out, has now been seen and replicated in not just many other hockey teams as well, but across many different sports and across many different domains. And I'm going to show you let's pull up the first slide. This is the chart that I used in my book Outliers to demonstrate what Paula Barnsley was talking about. And what's the thing to focus here on is the birth dates, right? Take a look. February, January, March, January, December, January, March, April, September, October, April. 17 of the 25, there's another, this isn't the complete roster, but if you go down the complete roster, 17 of the 25 kids on this team were born in January, February, or March, right? Or April. Now, Barnsley and lots of other people have subsequently observed this exact same effect, like I said, on countless elite hockey teams, to the point where it's now, in my book I referred to it as the iron law of Canadian hockey, which is that in any group of elite hockey players, 40% of the players will be born in the first 3 months of the year, 30% will be born in the next 3 months, 20% in the next 3 months, and 10% will be born in October, November, and December. Now, why is this? It's because the eligibility cutoff for Canadian hockey is January 1st. And Canadians care so much about hockey that they start putting together travel squads and all-star teams when the kids are 9 years old. And so coaches will observe a bunch of 9-year-olds playing hockey and say, those 3 kids are the best. But the kids that they're invariably picking as the best are the oldest, because at the age of 9, right, if you've got 12 months on, if you're born in January, you've got 12 months on a kid born in December, that's what, 13, 14, you're 14% older. You're bigger, you're stronger, you're more coordinated, you can deal out hits that other kids can't, you look like a better player, right? So they take those kids who they think are better but are just older, and what do? They give them better coaching, they play way more games, they get way more practice time, they get way more encouragement, and lo and behold, after a couple of years of that, they actually are better. So what begins as an arbitrary advantage hardens into a real advantage. The name for this is called the relative age effect, right? And if you ask people, and I have, who are involved in elite hockey in Canada, whether they think Canadian hockey is a meritocracy, they will say, well, of course it is. We produce more great hockey players than any other country in the world, right? This is the home of, we're a tiny country and we outperform everyone. Of course it's a meritocracy. We go out of our way to find the very best and the brightest. But a system that systematically disadvantages kids who are born at the end of the year can't be a meritocracy, right? One of the cardinal values of a meritocracy is that everyone begins that kind of talent competition on a level playing field, right? And this is not a level playing field. Okay, now you might say, that's just hockey. Who cares? It's a sport played by toothless Canadians. It's of no relevance to the rest of the world. Okay, let me show you this. Oh, this is, by the way, oh, sorry. I realized there was another chart I could have showed you. Whoops, let's look. January, March, May, January, February. Same thing. Okay, this is the chart I wanted to show you. So this is one chart from a huge data set looking at gifted and talented programs in the United Kingdom. And I think they use about 20 years of data. It comes from a paper by Stephen Cobley, 2009. And we're looking at science and math, gifted, talented programs. And they've broken them down by birth cohort. So birth cohort number 1 is kids born, the cutoff date for English schools is September 1st. So those are the kids born who are the relatively oldest in their class. All the way down to birth cohort 4 is the kids who are the relatively youngest in their class. And what you see is your chances of being selected for a gifted and talented program in middle school and high school in England. If you are the relatively oldest in your class, you essentially have double the chance of being in a gifted and talented program than if you're a relatively youngest in your class. This is not a phenomenon confined to England. If you go to any gifted and break down the birth dates of any gifted and talented program anywhere in the world, you will see exactly the same thing. Why is that? It's the same phenomenon we described with hockey. We ask teachers to identify the students who qualify for gifted and talented programs when those students are how old? Depends on the jurisdiction, but maybe 9, maybe 10, maybe 11. And so you pick out the kids who score the best on their math tests or their science tests, and you say, those are my talented ones, and you give them all kinds of encouragement and give them specialized curriculum and give them quality teaching, but you forget that when a kid is 10 years old, the ones who do the best on the science tests are going to be the oldest because they've got 12 months of cognitive development on the kids who are the youngest in the class, and you get this skewed distribution as a result. Now, if you ask people who are involved in gifted and talented programs, whether they are running a meritocratic process, they will tell you that they are. That's the whole point of gifted and talented programs, right? It is the insertion of meritocracy into a system to identify the very best and give them special opportunities. But this is not a meritocracy. This is the furthest thing from a meritocracy. This is a system that says, if you're born at the end of the year, you might as well forget it. Right? You don't have a chance. By the way, this is parenthetical, gave a talk at Penn on this once and asked the kids in the room, I had a random sample of seniors at Penn. So these are high-flying kids. And I said, what percentage of you were in gifted and talented programs, either in middle school or high school? 100% of the hands in the room went up. You can't get into Penn unless you were in a gifted and talented program. And you can't get into a gifted and talented program unless you were born at the right time of the year. I can't tell you how many parents came up to me after I wrote my book Outliers and said, I read your book and I saw that stuff on the relative age effect in hockey, and I held my kid back in school, and it was the best thing that I ever did. The kid went on to do all kinds of great things. And of course it was a great decision, but that's not the point, right? When parents hold their kids back, it just creates a different set of losers. All you're doing is turning a kid who used to be the youngest in their class into the oldest, and so someone else has to be the youngest. There's a private school near me upstate, okay, I'll tell you, Hotchkiss, where so many parents of relatively younger kids have held their kids back a year, that the parents of the kids who used to be the oldest in the class hold their kids back a year, whereupon the parents of the kids whose kids used to be the relatively youngest hold their kids back a second time. So we're in a situation where it's logically quite possible that those kids will never graduate. This is absolutely nuts, right? This is not the way we want to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is not to create an arms race where kids graduate from high school at 25. The solution to the problem is to address the fact that systemically something is wrong with the nature of the meritocracy. Right? So I wrote that book, Outliers, in 2008, and Barnsley's research goes back to highlighting Barnsley's research, which goes back to the 1980s. So I figured, okay, so if Barnsley first made this observation, which, by the way, no one had ever made before, in the 80s, which is what, 40 some odd years ago. And I wrote my book 15 years ago, where I really publicized it for the first time. You would think that there would be ample opportunity for the institutions that think they're meritocracies but actually aren't to correct their ways. So when I was preparing this talk, I thought, oh, good. Let's go back and replicate the chart that I used in 2008. And I was convinced that what we will see is that Canadian hockey has woken up to the fact that what they think of as a meritocracy actually isn't. This is the 2022 Canadian junior hockey team roster. I've just given you the birth months, and I'll read them for you. October, January, February, January, August, April, October, January, March, February, January. Is there another one? Hold on. No. Getting ahead of ourselves. On this side, September, November, June, March, January, April, September, January, August, September, July. They haven't learned anything at all, right? It's unbelievable to me that one of their own, one of the prominent psychologists in Canada, identifies a systemic flaw in the ways in which one of the Canadians care more about hockey than anything else. It's like they would literally do anything to improve as a hockey power. They created a system where they systematically leave about a third of the hockey playing population talent on the table just because they've erected this dumb system which neglects relative age effects when they pick traveling squads at 10, and they haven't fixed it, right? So maybe I should have a corollary when I said that proposition number one is that many things that look like meritocracies aren't actually meritocratic, and the corollary is the people running those fake meritocracies appear to be completely unaware of the fact that they are running a fake meritocracy. Okay. Proposition number two. The reason meritocracies are hard is that we're really bad at distinguishing merit from context. So I think the best way to explain what I mean by that is to go back to hockey for a moment. For the longest time in hockey, there's been a big argument about how you can tell whether a goalie is any good, right? And for much of the history of hockey, we've used three metrics to decide who we think is a good goaltender. One is what percentage of shots fired at a goalie does that goalie stop from going in the net, their save percentage. Two, how many goals do they let in the course of a given game? And three, how many games does a team win with that particular goalie in net, right? And every year the league gives out, the NHL gives out something called the Vezina Trophy, which goes to the best goaltender of the year. And invariably the Vezina Trophy goes to the goaltender who has the highest ranking on those three metrics, right? And if you ask people in the hockey world, who is one of the best goalies in the NHL over the last 10 years, they will probably say a guy named Andrei Vasilevsky. He'd be one of the top names they would give. And the reason they would say Andrei Vasilevsky is that Andrei Vasilevsky has done extraordinarily well on those three metrics. He's now 20 years old, comes from Russia, he plays for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He won the Vezina Trophy in 2019. He led his team to 3 consecutive Stanley Cup finals. Last year he set a record for, I think he posted his 6th series clinching shutout, which is an extraordinary fact. And people think he's very good, as I said, because he's one of the all-time leaders in the NHL in save percentage. So take a look. These are the greatest, on win percentage. These are the list of goalies of all time, according to what percentage of the games they won when they were behind the net. And you see he's third behind Ken Dryden and Jerry Chivas. Jerry Chivas, of course, played here in Boston for many years. Ken Dryden was the legendary goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. This is a list of every one of these guys is a Hall of Fame. I mean, this is the Pantheon, right? But all of you are very intelligent, and all of you, I'm sure, can come up with understand what the limitations of this particular data, this metric is, right? It doesn't tell us how good the team is around the goaltender. So if I'm playing for a team that has the greatest set of defensemen of all time, I don't have to be that good of a goaltender to not let in a lot of goals, right? They're blocking the shots, they're keeping people away from me, they're doing all their... And if I'm the most amazing goaltender in the world, but my defensemen are terrible, I can look really bad even though I have a lot of talent. So we need to somehow adjust for the fact that I am part of a larger organization, right? So it's really hard to tell, in other words, whether Vasilevsky is third of all time because he plays for a good team or because he's genuinely a great goaltender. So to deal with this problem, data scientists have come up with something called GSAX, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. GSAX is where you take a look at every goal and you look at all of the factors that influence that shot on net. So the speed of the puck, the angle of the puck, the distance it was fired from the net, the number of sticks that were in the way, the positioning of the defenseman, on and on and on. And what you do is you use that data to develop an estimate of the chance that that shot on goal will actually go in. What is the expected probability of that shot turning into a goal? And then over the course of the entire game, you then develop an expected number of goals scored, given all those factors. And you compare the expected number of goals scored to the actual number of goals scored. So I can look at a hockey game using GSAX and I can say, given the quality of their shots, the Bruins should have scored 6 goals in that game. They only scored 4. That must mean the goalie is really good, right? If they had an expected probability of 6 goals and scored 8, that means the goalie's terrible. GSAX is, we can all agree that GSAX is a much better way of assessing the quality of a goaltender, right? So, how does our friend Andrei Vasilevsky do when we look at GSAX? Right? So I'm going to look at, these are aggregated GSAX scores for the last 6 years. I'm sorry, yes. And let's look for Andrei Vasilevsky. Wait, where's Andrei? Andrei, where are you? Oh, there he is, way down at the bottom, right? He's not one of the best goaltenders of the last generation. He's worse than average. He's mediocre. He just plays for a great team, right? In fact, the team he's played for over the last 6 years has won, I think, 20 more games than any other team in hockey. I mean, he's just the luckiest guy in the world. He plays for a team with absolutely fabulous players, and so everyone thinks he's fabulous. He's not. He's worse than average. Now, given that fact, right, if we were living in a pure meritocracy, you would expect that when it came time to decide how much to pay Andrei Vasilevsky, that his team, Tampa Bay, should react rationally and pay him in accordance with his level of ability. They have access to this. They know that he's actually a mediocre goaltender who has benefited from extraordinary teammates, so he deserves a mediocre salary. They should rationally put their resources elsewhere, okay? So these are the highest paid NHL players. Andrei Vasilevsky, wait, he's the 10th highest paid player in the league. He's not even the 10th best goalie in the league. He's the 10th best. In other words, what's going on here? The people who run Tampa Bay are not idiots, are they? Why are they massively overpaying for someone who's not even average by the best statistical measures that we have? If you asked them, the management team of Tampa Bay, if they felt they were running a meritocracy and rewarding their players according to the level of ability, they would say absolutely. And yet what this says is that that's not even remotely true, right? That in some way, the management of that team is incapable of separating out the effect of the team from the talent of the individual. Now, once again, you would say, okay, maybe this is just hockey. Who cares about hockey, right? It's not the way the real world works. Really? Sure about that? Right? Let me give you another example of this very same phenomenon. There's you're all familiar with the correlation between the number of operations that a surgeon does and that surgeon's competence, performance, right? Basically, quality equals quantity. The more times a heart surgeon does a heart procedure, the better they are at it. That's why when you have a problem, if you need brain surgery or if you need heart surgery or something, you don't go to a rural hospital in the middle of South Dakota. You go to, Boston General or someplace where someone does 5 of them a day. And you know that you're going to be in good hands. And this effect is not only well described, but it is true of basically every medical procedure that we know. And I'll show you. This is a good example of something called a Norwood operation. A Norwood operation is a particularly tricky kind of pediatric cardiac surgery. And what we're looking at here is mortality rate as a function of annual case volume. And you can see if you do 100 of these a year, your mortality rate is way up here, right? Really high. If you do 800 of these a year, your mortality rate is about a quarter as much. It's really dramatic effect of quantity on quality, right? But there's a complication to this slide, and that is what happens when the surgeon does that same surgery at a different hospital. Right? So I work at Deaconess 4 days a week, and I do all my Norwood operations there. 1 day a week, though, I operate out of a little hospital way up in the Berkshires where my vacation home is. And I do my Norwood operations there on Fridays. Right? What happens to my mortality rate when I operate up in the Berkshires on Friday? And the answer is, my mortality rate goes way up here again. The same surgeon who's really great at Deaconess, when they go up to the tiny rural hospital in the Berkshires, they're terrible. They're 4 times worse. They're killing people. Why is that? The reason is that this chart does not measure the skill of a surgeon. It measures the skill of a surgical team, right? And when that doctor goes on Fridays to the Berkshires to operate out of a rural hospital, he leaves his Boston team at home, and he's all by himself with a group of strangers, and all of a sudden, when he's all by himself with a group of strangers, he's not very good anymore. Now, does that surgeon realize that? No. If he did realize that, he either wouldn't take Fridays off, or he'd take his team with him, right? But we have a system in medicine which finds these guys over here, these surgeons, and on the assumptions they are great surgeons, pays them enormous amounts of money, gives them prizes, rewards them, tells them that they're kings, promotes them to lofty positions, gives them chaired positions at medical schools, right? All on the assumption that the talent that they express in the operating room is theirs, belongs to them, is a function of something inside of their own heart and mind. And never once does that system understand the fact that, no, their talent resides in the group that surgeon responds to, right, or works with, right? That is, I want to read to you from the paper that I drew this chart from. They recognize this fact that volume is associated with success, and it says, that volume, however, does not significantly improve the surgeon's performance at other hospitals, thus suggesting that surgeon performance is not fully portable across organizations, right? It is the Andrei Vasilevsky problem. We construct this meritocracy to reward individuals, but a lot of things a lot of ways in which the world works do not depend on the efforts of individuals, but rather the efforts of teams. In your world, by the way, many of you I know are in finance, there is a brilliant set of papers that exactly parallel this, talking about analysts, star analysts and star bankers who move from one institution to the next, and the institution that poaches them on the belief those people can replicate their performance in their new home, and as often as not, they cannot. Why is that? For this very reason, that what you observed in an allegedly all-star performer in one institution was not the all-star performer, but the all-star performer's context, their team. Okay. Proposition number 3, and I think this is the most important of all of the propositions, and it's a little bit weird, but it is that meritocracies can be really brutal and unforgiving in a way that ought to make us question a little bit about their ultimate value. Like I said, this is a weird one, and it's based on this paper written by John Connolly and Ali Onder a couple years ago. They're 2 economists, and we're going to get into the weeds on this one. Just bear with me. They were really interested in looking, and they look at, by the way, this is a kind of analysis that you could do on any number of different fields, but they decided to choose, just for kind of the purposes of clarity, they decided to choose to look at the graduates of elite PhD programs in North American, elite PhD programs in economics at elite North American universities. And what they were interested in is the publication records of the economists in the 6 years after they received their doctorate. So in economics, as in many academic fields, you measure somebody's quality and worth and performance by how many papers and what quality of the papers they publish, right? So these guys developed a little algorithm, and it was weighted in favor of prestigious journals. And they were basically saying, okay, so how many papers do you get in really prestigious journals in the 6-year window after getting your doctorate? It's kind of like a slugging percentage for a baseball player. So they have their data set for the top 7 PhD programs in this country. And what we are looking at in this slide is the 99th percentile of PhD students. So in each of these programs, Harvard, MIT, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Stanford, Chicago, we're just looking at the kids who are basically at the top of their class, coming out of their PhD program, and we observe how many papers do they publish in prestigious journals in the next 6 years. And these numbers are off the charts. This is, if you publish 4.73 papers in elite journals in 6 years, that's really, really good. I would suggest to you that what we're looking at here is a pure meritocracy, a good working meritocracy in practice, right? These are schools that are culling the best and the brightest. They are giving them lots of opportunities, and these kids, upon graduation with their PhD, are knocking the ball out of the park. All right. Let's look at the performance of the students in the 80th percentile. So if a PhD program in economics typically has, say for the sake of argument, 20 students in it at some of these schools. So we're no longer interested in the number 1 student, or maybe we're interested in the student who ranks 4th or 5th. How well do they do? The number 1 student has 4.31 publications. The 80th percentile student, the number 4 student, has 0.71, less than 1. Go down the list. At every one of these elite institutions, with the exception of Princeton, which is at 101, they are, look at this, Columbia, what is going on? This is somebody, I'm serious. We're looking at, these are aggregate statistics over, I think, about 30 years. This is a kid who got into one of the finest PhD programs in the world in economics, graduates from his PhD program 4th in his class, and over the next 6 years of his life is essentially, I'm saying it's a he, or it's a she, does nothing. I mean, that's bananas. How is this possible, right? Okay, let's keep looking. Let's look at the full chart. Now, out of a sense of mercy, I didn't show you anything below the 55th percentile because it's just too depressing, but let's go over to the 55th percentile here. Harvard, so the 55th percentile, you're in the top half of your class at one of the greatest PhD programs in the world, at the world's allegedly most elite institution. What are you doing? The Columbia kid, by the way, we're not down to 0.01. This is absolutely nuts. And so the guys who wrote, the guys who wrote this paper did not expect to get this finding and did not have any explanation for what was happening. I'm going to quote you what they say. They're talking about, they were really focused, they, like me, were really focused on this Harvard kid at 0.07. To get to Harvard, an applicant has to have great grades, perfect test scores, strong and credible recommendations, and know how to package all this to stand out to the admissions committee. Thus, successful candidates must be hardworking, intelligent, well-trained as undergraduates, savvy, and ambitious. Why is it that the majority of these successful applicants, who were winners and did all the right things up to the time they applied to graduate school, become so unimpressive after they're trained? Are we failing the students, or are the students failing us? Right? It's really puzzling. Okay, now, let's try and figure this out. Let's now compare this performance to the performance of PhD students at bad schools. By the way, the Boston does not refer to Boston College. It refers to BU, which I'm calling it a bad school because it's not even the best school in its neighborhood. So how Toronto I put up here. I went to Toronto. I have the right to put them up there. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. But non-top 30 is just, that's an aggregate number to represent all the schools that are not in the top, basically 25. We've aggregated all these. What do you find if you look at this? Take a look at this. The kids who graduate at the top of their class from non-elite schools or schools like Toronto and BU, which aren't considered to be in the same breath as MIT and Harvard, basically have as many publications in elite universities as the really fancy schools, right? By the way, the 95th percentile does pretty well here too. Look at that number, right? Is this not fascinating, right? That these students right here, this is a PhD student at, I don't know, the University of Georgia. A school that someone who goes to MIT or Harvard or Stanford, I mean, they don't even know that it exists. That's how low they think the University of Georgia. I just picked the University of Georgia out of a hat. A school that nobody would consider elite in economics. This is the best student in the Georgia economics department, and they come out and they are publishing they are as successful as an academic economist as virtually anyone who goes to one of those elite schools. Right? So what's going on here? Well, it is a version of what I was describing earlier, which is that what matters is not your absolute standing, not the absolute quality of the institution that you attend, but your relative standing within the institution that you attend. Right? If you're at Harvard and you're in that class of 20 absolute geniuses and you're not one of the best, you compare yourself to those around you and you get really depressed. You think, I can't do economics, right? And there's that superstar down the hall who's already publishing papers even in grad school, and you're like, I must be an idiot. Right? And you sit on your hands and you don't do anything and you throw away what should have been a really promising career. Meanwhile, if you're that kid at BU and you're number one in your class and you couldn't get into MIT or Stanford or Harvard, you went to BU because that's the best school you could get into, but you're a star at BU. Your teachers like working with you. They share ideas with you. You get lots of encouragement. You get claps on the back. You feel like you can really do something in this field. And it translates in the real world to really extraordinary performance. You are publishing on a level that is equal to the publication level of your peers from all these fancy schools, right? What are the lessons of this? One is that achievement in a really complicated, demanding field like economics, and I think many, by the way, of the fields that all of you in this room are preparing for are analogous to this, is not a simple matter of cognitive ability. It's powerfully shaped by your context. That the way, the environment in which you were trained and brought to maturity as a professional has a really, really enduring and powerful influence on your ability to achieve at a high level once you go out into the world. That's what this is telling us, right? The decision of where these students went was the most important decision they made in their career as academic economists. Second point, that encouragement and social support in terms of bringing out success in a field really, really, really matter. That's what's going on here, right? These students got encouragement. They weren't at the fanciest school in the world, but they had people who had their back and who believed in them, and the result was extraordinary performance. When we go back to that kid's at the greatest school in the world, and he is neglected, or she is neglected, and the result is they don't do anything, right? Third thing is that meritocracies like this are really, really wasteful. Oh my goodness, are they wasteful. Think of that class of 20 kids who got into the PhD program at Harvard. If you look at that class of 20 kids, basically 2 or 3 of them go on to have productive careers. And the rest, the other 17, they do nothing. They get disillusioned and they stop performing at a high level. And that's no way to run the world, right? Why would we have as our gold standard a system that essentially promotes and creates 2 successful careers at the cost of 18? Right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Now, given this fact, given that quality and performance in an elite field like PhD economics is a function of your relative standing in your institution, not the absolute quality of your institution, you would think that intelligent elite institutions should alter their hiring practices, right? You would think that if you're the Harvard Economics Department, what you really should be doing every year is hiring the best students, best PhD graduates from all manner of schools, schools all over the world. Not worry about the underlying reputation of the institution, worry about the relative standing of the student that you're hiring. That is the surest path to building a high prestige, or a highly performing faculty. So we should expect, when we look at the schools where Harvard's economics departments got their PhD, we should expect to see a wide variety of schools, right? That's what we should expect to see. So let's take a look. I realize, they like to pretend over there on the other side of the river that they are the world's biggest geniuses. But this is completely bonkers. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because this is something, first of all, that a school like Boston College should think about, right? This is a very, very, very good school, filled with a lot of very, very, very talented and devoted and hardworking people. And all of you are here because you believe in the ideas of meritocracies. And this school is a part of the American meritocracy. But I think we all have to understand and appreciate the fact that there are moments, key moments, in the life of a meritocracy when a meritocracy can get hijacked, when mistakes can be made in its planning and implementation that have the effect of not rewarding the best and the brightest, of leaving some real talent on the table, of discouraging people who would otherwise be encouraged. And if we truly want to have a society which encourages people to try their hardest and rewards ability, we have to pay attention to things like this. This is just sloppy, right? That's just dumb. They're just turning their backs on talent and going and hiring people because they happen to go to a fancy-sounding institution. Now, is fixing this problem possible? I think it is. And I want to give you one. I want to end with an example of an institution that that really did take a long, hard look at what they were doing and change it. And it's the world of English squash, competitive squash. I realize that's a funny way to end, but I love what they did. They did an analysis about 10 years ago of who was succeeding in the upper levels of the English squash world. And what they discovered was exactly what Roger Barnsley discovered, that they had that 40, 30, 20, 10 distribution. The cutoff date for eligibility, for age class eligibility in youth squash in England is January 1st, and basically everybody was from the first half of the year. And if you were born in October, November, and December, you had zero chance of being an elite squash player. So they decided to change their rules. And what did they do? Well, under the old system, you broke down the age categories by January 1st, right? That was the cutoff date. And they said, no, from now on, you advance to the next age category on your birthday. Everybody advances on a different day, right? And what that means is the first 3 months after you advance into the next age category, you are the youngest in your cohort. Then you spend 4 months, first 4 months you're the youngest, next 4 months you're in the middle, and the final 4 months you're the oldest in your cohort. And that works really well. Why? Because when you're the youngest, you're forced to improvise and learn all kinds of strategies to go up against people who are much bigger and tougher than you. So that's really useful. And then when you're the oldest, the last 4 months, you get confidence. And that's really useful. And after doing that for a couple of years, what did they discover? They discovered that their age breakdown was no longer 40, 30, 20, 10. It was 25, 25, 25, 25. They were no longer leaving any talent on the table. By the way, they took another step, which was they realized that, like lots of sports, they had won big national championships every year in August. And they realized, wait, that's dumb. Doesn't make any sense. If you have won national championships a year, then you are disproportionately rewarding the kid who happens to be the oldest in their age cohort in August. Crazy. So they switched it, and now they have 4 championships a year, right? 1 in every season. So every kid gets a chance to compete at the national level at the moment in their development when they are relatively the oldest in their cohort. Right? And what they have discovered is that in the increasingly competitive world of international squash, England is back up at the top. Right? They have finally found a sport they can compete at on the world stage. So squash had a meritocracy that wasn't really a meritocracy. It was biased against a class of people who just happened to be born in the wrong months of the year. They were aware enough to measure that bias, honest enough to admit to that bias, and determined enough to fix it. And I think that is a model for the rest of us as we go about looking at the meritocracies in our life. There is a genuine feeling in this country that this country is broken, that systems are rigged in favor of one group or another. And it is very easy for us to sit there and dismiss those feelings as being the result of partisan bias or too much Fox News or one thing or the other. But I think we have to also understand that there is a real element of truth in that we have gotten lazy in the way we build these systems. And it's up to us to fix them if we want to heal this country, right? A good hockey player is a terrible thing to waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, for both enlightening and entertaining us. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. There are students who will have microphones. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll get the microphone over to you so everyone can hear. And we'd love to hear your questions for Malcolm Gladwell. Who's got the first question?
This one.
Wait for the mic.
Is there a cap on the number of PhD papers that can be published in a year? A set number?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know enough about that particular marketplace, but I don't think that's the constraint, right? So the EU would think if there was a cap, then you should see relative, if there was a limited number of spaces, what you're simply looking for is the distribution of students within that limited number. Say there's 100 spaces. What you're looking for is that everyone within the top 50% of any class should have an equal shot at participating in those 100 spaces, right? And that's what we're not seeing. But I don't know I can't answer to the specifics of that.
Thank you. And I love the memory episode with Elvis on Revisionist History.
Oh, thank you.
We have a question up in the back on the right.
In the case with PhD students, have you thought of how that scenario could interplay with like the work of Carol Dweck and growth mindset and the effective awareness of that they are relatively, on the top when you think more universally versus, that local comparison and what the effects would be on those students in the 50th percentile and those.
Yeah, so this ties into this whole world, as you allude to, this whole world of recent psychological research that talks about the kind of contextual psychological variables that drive performance. The growth mindset being, one of them, and it's alerting us to the extent to which pure cognitive ability is tempered by those kinds of attitudes, mindsets, and the environments that drive them. And I think you're absolutely right to bring her up, because this is proof of that like you could take these incredibly bright people, and if they're being forced into an assessment, not forced, but kind of lured into a self-assessment that is at odds with cognitive reality, and that is crippling them in the workplace. And unless, there's two possible solutions to this. One is that elite institutions become aware of just how dangerous their systems are for those who aren't at the top. By the way, do you know about this? This was the famous theory. Years and years and years ago, the question was raised of why do schools like Harvard let in so many athletes and legacies? And the admissions director at the time in the 50s, who believed very strongly in this, called it the happy bottom quarter. And what he meant was being the dumbest kid in your Harvard class is really, really hard. And the only people who are going to be tough enough to deal with that burden are either athletes who are tough-minded and have another area that they're excelling in, or legacies whose parents are rich and they're fine. And this, with a straight face. This is why they said it's a really good idea for us to let in students who are, a standard deviation dumber than everybody else, because it's really, but there's a serious point here, which is that we don't pay nearly enough attention to the fact that how difficult it is not to be in the top half of any distribution academically. And I have a young child, and when I look at those numbers, I think I do not want to send her to the quote-unquote best school that I can find. I want to send her to a school where she can be in the top 10% of her class. That's, to my mind, the only consideration. And I think a lot of other people would benefit from taking that perspective. I will say one last thing on this. This is one of the reasons as well. One of the great puzzles about HBCUs is why do HBCUs massively outperform all other colleges in terms of producing, for example, STEM graduates? So HBCUs, if you look at the African-American undergraduate population, they're a tiny fraction of they educate a tiny fraction of the college-age population of African-Americans and produce this much of the share of STEM graduates. Why is that? And I think it's because they've cracked that problem. That those are institutions where you can be in the 50th percentile and you don't feel like you're getting swamped. For whatever reason, that's their secret sauce. And that we don't, it's one of the reasons why there's such an incredibly valuable institution in this country. Without HBCUs, the performance, sorry, this is a hobby horse of mine, but you take two cognitively equal kids, black kids, who want to do STEM, send one to Harvard and send one to Morehouse. The odds of the one going to Morehouse ending up in STEM are so much higher that it makes you wonder what Harvard's doing, right? Anyway.
Question in the back.
So you've presented these failures as essentially failures of the institutions, that they're kind of selecting the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. But I kind of wonder about whether the variation might be harder to get rid of. So I have a paper on the relative age effect in mutual fund managers. So it sort of looks a little bit like the hockey guys, that the guys that were the oldest in their kindergarten class run better funds, they have higher returns, they get more flows. But what we looked at is whether there's like personality effects. So you just weren't bullied as much in kindergarten, and so you end up more confident and you just run a different fund. And if you just look at the CV photos of these guys, and some of the oldest, some of the youngest, and you give them to respondents, you don't even tell them who they are, and you just say, which person looks more confident? 55% of the time, they pick the one that was older in their class. And so that's a kind of different sort of problem. And then you might think, well, maybe it's something with the kindergartens and we have to fix the kindergartens, except that there's also birth order effects, where if you're the oldest in your family, you have similar kinds of patterns. So is this just sort of telling us that maybe there's uneven access to all sorts of stuff and we're never really going to get around it?
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating stuff. Yes. Can we 100% get rid of these kinds of biases? No, not a chance. There's always going to be something. But what I'm describing is there's no reason for us to magnify them. So that kindergarten thing, for example, why on earth do elementary schools not sort their kids by birth date? This drives me nuts. I went to an elementary school that had 3 classes in every grade. Logically, you should put the January, April kids in one class, the May, September kids in another class, and the October, December kids in a third class. That's what you should do. At least give them a 3 or 4 year window where they're only competing with kids who are relatively near to them in birth date. Why that isn't widespread across every elementary school in this country, I have no idea. They have been staring this data in the face for 25 years, for 35 years, and they refuse to do anything about it. And by the way, I haven't even, the list, you know this, the list of things that are associated with being the youngest in your class, more likely to be diagnosed with learning disorders, more likely to be disciplined, more likely to drop out of school, more likely to be depressed, there's a whole long list of corollary things that extend into adulthood that are the consequence of being disadvantaged in your earliest stage of life. And the schools are resolutely indifferent to this. So to my point, there is no reason for us to magnify these effects. We can't get rid of them, but we can minimize them.
One more quick question. Down in front here.
I guess I'll do it without a microphone. So I'm a former member of the Harvard Economics Department.
We have to hear this. There's a microphone right there.
This is perfect. This is my rebuke that's coming.
Okay. By the way, I went to a very low-ranked PhD program and somehow slipped in. So one small point on that before I get to my question, which is it's not just the sort of psychological impacts of the person. What's also happening is the team turns against them. And there have been some really sort of unfortunate dynamics around the sort of part of the cohort who aren't succeeding in terms of where they're going. Anyway, fabulous talk, thank you. And you focused on mostly random kinds of unfairnesses in the way supposed meritocracies work. I wonder if you could say something about the issues that have gotten a lot of attention in terms of how things aren't functioning in a meritocracy, which are ascriptive characteristics like skin color, gender, appearance, and so forth, and how you think those matter or not.
Yeah. Yeah, so I did leave them out just because I felt we're more familiar with them. But I think in many ways, some of those more obvious ones dwarf the metrics that I was looking at here. You know, we do it at my little company that we have, I started a little audio company. And we, for example, have put in this practice, this thing that I've been doing for years, which is not to ask for the name of the institutions. People can't tell us where they went to school when they apply for jobs. It's a very simple thing which removes a little bit of, helps to remove some of that bias. I really worry more though about, you mentioned race is of course the biggest and oldest one, but I'm beginning to wonder whether there is we know that there is really, really ingrained biases in favor of the attractive, however that is defined. If you're a slender white person, you have huge, you know, with a big smile, you got a huge head start. And there's some really simple ways I think we could do you can't get rid of all of it. You could at least minimize that a little bit. I really, really, really hate job interviews. I just think that they are an invitation to be misled about somebody. And I long for a day where we make the decision of whether to hire someone without ever having met them, and whether there's a way we can creatively judge someone's worth without having to actually meet them. Now that may produce a whole set of other issues down the road, but I honestly do think in an awful lot of situations in this country, we are simply hiring people who we find attractive and we want to hang out with. And that's just nuts. That's not good.
Malcolm, thank you very much. On behalf of all of us at Boston College, we're gonna take a brief coffee break. Please do your best to be back here at 10 o'clock for a very important presentation from Megan O'Sullivan.